I immediately dove headfirst into it. I would practice all the time, in all places and at all times. My fellow classmates would be like, Pantele, you gotta stop chanting at some point. So it was Mr. Steliaros, and he had 3 or 4 of his students with him, and it was amazing. And I was just like, wow, who are these kids? They were my age, probably a little younger. They were like early 20s. I was 24 years old at the time, unbelievably talented. But there was clearly a sense of reverence. I believe they didn't clap until the end. They didn't consider it a performance. Rather, it was a prayer. This is worship hymns. They're not performance hymns.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Ethos and Yphos, a podcast from the Sons of Antioch Media. I am joined today by Father Panteleimon Papadopoulos. Father Panteleimon is the Proistamenos at Holy Resurrection Greek Orthodox Church in Brookville, New York, former Archdeacon for 20 years for Archbishop Demetrios and Archbishop Elpidophoros. He is a Byzantine music zealot who has his certification in Byzantine chant from Holy Cross Hellenic College, and for 10 years, he helped to operate the Greek Orthodox Archdiocesan Byzantine Choir, along with the GOA School of Byzantine Music. Father Panteleimon, thank you so much for joining us today.
George, I also thank you for having me on the show. It's a great joy to see you. I know your father and your love for Byzantine music only resonates with me very beautifully, and no pun intended. I look forward to a wonderful discussion. I want to thank also, you're this new podcast of Ethos and Yphos by the Sons of Antioch Media. I think you're doing wonderful work. And I think as we spread more our love for Byzantine music and the tradition of our church and our liturgical musical tradition, I think is always a plus. And it kind of connects, right? It connects continents even. Greece and our Patriarchate, our Ecumenical Patriarchate, and Lebanon and Antioch and all these places that have still preserved this wonderful tradition. So thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank God. Thank you again, Father. So first, I want to start off with a little bit of your personal journey in chanting.
Sure.
So give us a detailed journey from the beginning, from that first spark of Byzantine chant, the first time you heard it, the first time you were inspired by it, all the way through the journey where you learned, the teachers who you had, people who inspired you, and then also as well as some interplay with the priesthood and your priestly ministry, how those two things sort of go together. We'll get into that a little bit more later on, but just tell us a little bit about your experience growing in Byzantine chant.
Sure. Thank you, George. You're making me go back into wonderful memories of my life, so I appreciate the opportunity. For sure, I grew up in a home that was, I would say, pious home. Both of my parents were very faithful Orthodox Christians, practicing, I would say, Orthodox Christians. And I had the great blessing, George, every single summer during my younger years, from as early as I can remember, probably 6, 7 years old, 8 years old for sure. We would be, my mother's whole family came from Greece to the States. My father's whole family stayed in Greece, in the north of Greece, near Thessaloniki. So every year, my 2 older brothers and myself, we would travel to Greece for about 2.5 months, 2 or 3 days after school let out to 2 or 3, 4 days before school began again. And so I had the great blessing of being in Greece, kind of in the culture of Byzantine chant. And my first cousin, who's about 10 years older than me, who's also a priest, and I would say very musically inclined, he would take me to countless churches in and around our own place, but probably the most wonderful experience was at a very young age, probably around 10 years old, going to Mount Athos, and for the first time kind of hearing that whole other world sound, right? My father, growing up, was a chanter. He's still with us, but he's 85, 86 now, so his voice is kind of weakened a little bit. But he still chants. And so he was a practical chanter. He didn't know music, but he had an incredible ear and kind of manifests the older tradition of how it was done. I mean, before printing presses, how did you learn how to chant? How did you learn the hymns? They would learn by heart. And I've met people like that. In fact, my father would do kind of some funny things at the chant stand, because once you've sung a doxastikon year after year, he would sometimes close the book and sing it by heart, or turn the book upside down just to see if we were paying attention. Because he had learned all these hymns by heart. And not only the words of the hymns, but the melodies of the doxastika. So one who would visit would actually think he's reading from a music text, right? Because his endings were on the right pitch. His what we call the astimata, the intervals were, whoa, wait a minute. How does he know music? And he would say, I don't know music. I just have the sounds. And being from the north of Greece, and kind of the influence of Mount Athos in northern Greece, and also from the Patriarchate, when there were, populations that were ousted from Constantinople and other places, a lot of these chanters ended up mostly in the north of Greece. So we had tremendous traditions and a kind of vitalization of the Byzantine chant, even in throughout Greece. So as we say in Greek, akousmata, my sounds that I heard from a young age, first were from my father, then the joy of being in Greece during my youthful years and kind of traveling to Mount Athos, other monasteries, other good chanters that were there as well, right? That kind of where everything kind of starts. And then in my teenage years, and George, frankly, from as young as I can remember, I wanted to be a priest. So I never had an experience. I never saw a light or saw a saint or anything like that. It's just from a very young age, I would always say, I want to be a priest. And by God's grace, in my teenage years, in my undergraduate, actually, we had a really good chanter, a young fellow, it's probably my age, even younger, who's now a monk in one of our monasteries upstate, St. Nectarius. His name is Father Ephraim. He was teaching classes as a young, 14-year-old. He was like an incredible chanter. He was learning under Archon Nikolaos Steliaros, of blessed memory. He passed away just about 2 years ago, or a year ago. Archon Nikolaos. And he came to us from a tradition of Chios, with the Constantinopolitan influence. Great chanter, phenomenal teacher, very, very strict. I'll get to him in just a little bit. So I was so disinterested. Like my eldest brother, who has inherited the genes of the voice, he had, in the ear of my father, my brother can mimic any chanter that he hears by heart, literally by heart. Doxastika by heart, hymns of Holy Week by heart. So he has that gift. I don't have that gift. And he would go for some classes, but I was just not interested. It wasn't until I finished college, believe it or not, now always having the sounds in the ears and listening to a lot of chant from Mount Athos, frankly, when I got to seminary in 1998, that's when I was like, I remember vividly my first Vespers on campus, and just my eyes like, holy moly, like, who is that chanter? It was Professor Fotios Ketzedzis, who now resides in Athens. I mean, this man, I was like, wow. He was monophonic. Normally you have the choirs, in Mount Athos. You don't really cut off one person's voice over another. This was the first time I heard live a soloist who was exceptional. And so we had to take Byzantine music in seminary. I immediately dove headfirst into it. I would practice all the time, in all places and at all times. My fellow classmates would be like, Pantele, you got to stop chanting at some point. They'd walk by my room. They'd walk by, forgive me, the bathroom. They'd walk by up to chapel. I was always chanting. So they were like, you really do have to stop at some point. So, I remember going to Boston coffee houses and just sitting there with my Anastasi Matarion and just like, paralayi, paralayi, paralayi. That definitely was, I would say, the turning point in my love for Byzantine music. I actually literally couldn't stop getting enough of it. And for the first time in my life, I was learning the notation, which was also fascinating. First time in my life, learning intervals and all these kinds of things that we learn when we're studying the music. And then by God's grace, by the end of my 3 years at Holy Cross, with teaching and learning from Mr. Getzidzis and outside of class with other kids who are well versed in the chant, I had a very solid foundation, I would say. Was I able to sight read, more difficult pieces? Probably not. Chanted a Holy Week in my senior year. Probably made a number of mistakes, no doubt about it. But definitely more competence by the end of 3 years. Definitely. And from there, I was immediately ordained a deacon in 2001 and brought to the Archdiocese. And I had heard about this man, Nikolaos Steliaros, kind of like in the back of my brain. And then, sure enough, we end up I was ordained a deacon, assigned to the Archdiocese under Archbishop Demetrios. And so we visit this church, and it's like, wow, who's that now? So it was Mr. Steliaros, and he had 3 or 4 of his students with him, and it was amazing. I remember again the Sunday. I remember exactly where I was, and I was just saying, wow, who are these kids? They were my age, even probably a little younger. They were like early 20s. I was 24 years old at the time, and I'm seeing these young kids in their teens, like unbelievably talented. So that stuck in my head. And then knowing my love for the music, I walked up to the Mr. Steliaros, and I said to him, my name is Father Panteleimon, and I understand you do classes. He says, yes, I do. I offer Byzantine music classes. I said, would you be able to teach me more? He says, have you studied? Yeah, we got to the details. He says, all right, Tuesday, 10 a.m., come to this church. I teach in the basement. This man, when we talk about strict, it's an understatement, George. He would say 100 times the solfege, the paralagi, 100 times melos. Not 10 times, in one time. No, 100 and 100. And that's basically what we did. We went, the first class I remember, he told me, bring any book you know how to chant. So, of course, I took Holy Week. And he opens up, he says, Paralagi, this piece. Oh, I thought I was, Pavarotti. About a minute and a half into the hymn, he took the book and closed it in my face. And he said, okay, we're going to start at step 1, my friend. He said, because you have many points of lacking. You are not at all holding your time properly, and your jumps are a little off, and your this is a little off. And now I thought I was spectacular. In my own brain, I thought I was like, hey, 3 years, I know everything. It was definitely not the case. And there began a beautiful relationship of almost 6 years. I studied almost, except for summertime when I would travel to Greece, every Tuesday for almost about 6 years. And I'm talking painstakingly. We went page by page by page, paralagi and melos of the whole Anastasimmatarion and all 8 volumes of the Pandecti. Page by page. Brutal. And he would say, Father, I do this for free. I have the time and the ability to do this. Please, he says, I've had hundreds of students come to me. Very, very few have stayed. So please, he would say, do not waste my time. I'm too old to have my time wasted. If you're serious about learning, then you come prepared. And when I say we do this piece, or we don't proceed, if you cannot do the piece the way I want it, game over. You're going home, I'll close the book. We don't waste our time. So the constant chanting continued in my home, at work, as a deacon, but the results were very clear. He was very strict. The smallest error, George, he would have you do it right from the beginning, not from... He had one-on-one, so you couldn't hide in the group like we did at seminary. It was like 20 kids in the class. You could hide your imperfections. He was you facing him looking at his book, you looking at your book. You had to keep the beat. You had to do every single trissimo, tetrasimo, the 3 beat, the 4 beats impeccably. And if you didn't do that, it was start again. So he was very tough, but the 7-10 students that finally made it through boot camp, finally made it through the Navy SEALs of Byzantine chant, definitely came out on the other side being very, very gifted. And they have been then that kind of developed into, to continue the conversation, about, I would say 8 or 9 years into my diaconal service, after I completed and was coming to the end of my own studies, he said, I said to him, he didn't want to be called Archon or I should comment, because it's worth noting, these old timers, he would invoke in you respect. You had to be on time to your class, no excuses. You had to stand if he walked in after you. In other words, his teaching of the music was not just teaching you music. There's the, I don't know how it's said in in English, you had to use the plural of respect when you spoke to him. I don't know if that's the technical term, but it was like you had to use the plural when addressing him.
Like the formal.
The formal.
Yeah.
You could not address him, hey, you. You had to do the formal in plural in Greek is the way you show respect for someone. He taught you had to speak to him that way. He taught you to make even a sigma that was missing on one of your words that you chanted. He would say, do it again. You cut a letter there. This precision of attitude and behavior and respect and execution of the music was something that I just don't see in teachers today, frankly. And is kind of the model then when we began with the blessing of Archbishop Demetrios at the time, was the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. He said, I said, Your Eminence, what do you think if we try to begin a school? So, of course, Mr. Steliaros was instrumental in guiding that conversation by wanting his best student, Dimitri Kechayas, to assume the overall, operations, if you will, or the teaching part of the music. And he kind of followed exactly Steliaros's model of teaching. Very small, one-on-one or one-on-two, and paralayi and melos, at whatever pace, kind of where the kids wanted to go. That morphed in, as we began the school, into producing a book called the Archdiocesan School of Byzantine Music, what is it called? School of Byzantine Chant, something in theory, I think Practice in Theory. And it was a handbook that we wrote. Father Aristide Garinis was involved, Dimitri Kechayas, Father Romanos Karanos from the school was involved. I think Father Michael Yavris, Andoni Kechayas, Dimitri's brother, also a student of Mr. Steliaros, did all of the exercise recordings. So it was a collective effort, produced a book that becomes the handbook for the school that we founded. That then gave birth to, hey, there's all these chanters in New York, tri-state area. Why don't we create a Byzantine choir with Dimitri as the conductor? And that's kind of how the Archdiocese Byzantine Choir was formed. That went on for 10 years. We had performances both here and abroad. We had gone to Constantinople twice. in the Church of the Holy Peace of God, Hagia Irini, which is right behind Hagia Sophia.
Sorry, before you continue. So the school came before the actual formation of the choir?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
It kind of was a natural progression. We wanted our kids who were learning to then be like performing. So it was the whole impetus behind the choir was to be like a performing arts, if you will, arm of the school, and wanting to promote the beauty of this tradition in and around New York initially. So we did university performances. We went to Carnegie Hall. We went to Merkin Hall. We were invited to the Metropolitan Museum when they had done something in conjunction with Islam and Sounds of the East and this kind of thing. So it became kind of like this phorea is the Greek word, an agent of, promoting the music in our liturgical musical tradition, which is what it was all about. But we had already such talent, former students of Mr. Steliaros, and not only, other kids who had also studied in Chicago and other places. And then we tied in a group and those who were studying at the seminary. So when we had gone, for example, to Constantinople, we had like 40 chanters, 45 chanters. And you can find that online if you look up concert, Hagia Irini, Archdiocesan Byzantine Choir, 2014 and 13 we had gone. It was a most memorable event. The school continued to have classes initially in Astoria and then at the cathedral in Manhattan. And, on Saturdays when we had major feasts and liturgies, our students would come to the chant stand. And we had kids beginning at 6 and 7 years old, and some stuck with it. Again, kind of like the teacher, Mr. Steliaros, said, a lot of kids come to learn, but if your heart and soul isn't in it, you're not really going to move forward. You're going to probably drop out. So, and we wanted a certain standard. So we weren't super strict, at least initially, but as the years went on, then we had to cut some. If forgive me, if you're tone deaf, you can't learn to chant. I mean, there's just a reality there. We tried some things. We tried to do like a practical chanting class, but again, it's not feasible, to accommodate those who are less musically inclined. But
so to segue into our next topic, I see how much of an influence Nikolaos Steliaros, how much of an influence he had on chanters in America now, and the Greek Byzantine Choir, the Greek Archdiocesan Byzantine Choir has been instrumental. At least I can speak for myself. For me, when I was starting out, listening to recordings and things, listening to the concert in Constantinople, that was way before I even started chanting. And I remember the first time I heard you guys live, it was at a Pan-Orthodox concert in Paramus, New Jersey in 2019. Yeah. And so we had our small Antiochian cathedral choir of about 7 to 10 people who was performing. And we did a few things in Arabic, a few things in English. And then I heard you guys come on after, and there was like 30 people, and it was this grand performance. And I was blown away. And that became a huge... I had already started at that point, but it became something where I said, okay, now there's so much, the ceiling is so much higher than I thought was ever possible, right? Where I thought I could be at some point in chanting. All of those people just blew it out completely. So I need to work all the more harder, right? So as far as the influence of the choir, the influence of the Byzantine music school as you got into, and we'll get into it a little more, I want to get into a little bit more details on that. But as far as the progression of chanting in America, right, where was it when you started? Where was it now? You spoke a little bit about your personal experience, but now, from what you've seen on the outside, where was it then? Where is it now? What progression has it gone through? What, I don't even want to say revolution, but the sort of evolution, right? Yeah. Has it gone through a Byzantine chant in English? And how does the culture in America interplay with Byzantine chant?
I can say, because it would not be fair and accurate, that there were pockets of wonderful work being done. Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Chicago. There were definitely circles of Byzantine music, people who were teaching, particularly in Chicago. I remember a number of my classmates at the seminary. These are phenomenal chanters, and they were young. And, they had a teacher there. I don't want to quote the name of the teacher, because the last thing I want to do is quote it incorrectly. I think his name was Bonanno, but I could be wrong. But apparently this man also was teaching and cultivating these young men who were gifted musically, and the Metropolitan was assisting. And then in Pittsburgh, some other people there working and promoting the music, and then in San Francisco doing work. In my own years at the Archdiocese, so it was like all these people in individual satellites doing work. We tried to make bridges between all these places. We tried on an archdiocesan level to bring all these people to the table, to make a more concerted effort, to establish some things in Byzantine music. And I'm sure that led to Father Romanos and Holy Cross making now the certificate program. And the examiners were a person from Pittsburgh, a person from the West Coast, people who had gotten their own certificates and diplomas and whatnot. So, it kind of naturally started working that way. And then we had seminarians under Father Romanos, and in particular, a number of them, and not only, but a number of them, beginning to write Byzantine music in English. For me, it was the first. And these were kids very talented at doing this. And then, more recently, the formation of a Byzantine choir in English, which is like, whoa. Then, introduction of Byzantine chant for women. We had attempted something, it kind of fizzled out. Now I see there's some other efforts being done to kind of resurrect, so to speak. But we're talking like a program at Holy Cross now formally, as an actual, study course. I don't mean course by one course, but I mean like a trajectory of studies in the field of Byzantine music. So I think nationally, everything kind of started just growing, George. And I can't say I have my finger on the pulse now for the last 6 years, but from the publications that I'm seeing from Capella Romana, the publications I'm seeing from people like, Gabriel Cremines and Sam Heron, these are people who have now dedicated years to the production of Byzantine music in English, making it accessible finally, even to the people who don't know Greek. I mean, I assume it's the same in the church of Antioch. I mean, there's people here in the States who know English, so chanting in Arabic has its own beauty, but is it as accessible to the people in the pew, and making it accessible in terms of the language I worship God in. This, George, is a great step in the right direction, I would say, without the abandonment of the old, but also this kind of, accessibility. So, I would say that things developed. There was growth, there was expansion, there was movement, and definitely the future, what it holds, because, and again, this is not a knock against Western choirs. We never saw it that way, even with the formation of the school of chant. I mean, we didn't want to project, but the objective truth is Orthros, the Matins, is suffering. Because as you don't have, this for the school too, from the original thinking, we need to develop chanters who can carry a worship service from the beginning. Our choirs in the GOA, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, don't really sing Orthros. They only sing exclusively the liturgy. And their expression of that liturgy is limited. They don't go tone for tone every week and this kind of thing. I'm blessed here in Holy Resurrection. I have great chanters, John Spanos, and we do the tones as they are every week. We shift. So, yeah, I think the advent of Byzantine chant in English, covering even Orthros, is something very beautiful to witness, making it meaningful to our people. I think this is going to be only growing as we look to the future, George.
God willing, and that really is the ethos of our choir. The driving force of our choir is to help procure and to put out good quality Byzantine chant resources, music compositions, recordings for people to learn. Because listen, to go back to your first point, listening is like the most important thing, right? Learning by ear before you do anything. I just recently started a Byzantine chant class for our young adults at the church that I work at, Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Church in Brooklyn, and I love this. I love how zealous all of our new people are. That all the new people want to learn Byzantine chant. So everyone in the choir is a recent convert within the last couple of years. So what they lack, they have in abundance the zeal to learn, but what they lack is the background and the ear. Yeah. So the first thing that I had them do, and this is sort of a fast track, it's not exactly the X amount of years that you grew up learning and hearing these things and just taking them in without even knowing, but I made them memorize all of the resurrectional Apolitikia, right? It helps them take in the music, but also then these words become inscribed in their hearts, so it's a mixture of both those things. And now having the ability to do that in English, I think it's so beautiful, and it will only help further evangelize people in the New World.
Sure.
So as far as, I don't want to say Greek versus English, but in comparing those two things, for you being fluent in English, fluent in Greek, and most of your studies were in Greek, I imagine.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of them.
All of them.
Yeah. Knowing your teachers, I I would imagine that were the case.
That's right.
Yeah. But in comparing the dynamics, sort of, between Greek and English, because Byzantine chant in English is still in its infancy.
Sure.
And so we're always learning, learning new ways to enunciate things, or not new ways, but learning the correct way to enunciate things and how to shape.
The whole methodology behind
Right.
English chant.
Right. So how would you...
Hearing and whatnot.
Yeah, how would you compare those dynamics? And then also, what can be brought over from sort of the old tradition of, or not the language, but what can be brought over from the tradition, and what needs to develop on its own?
For sure, if you spoke to any of the great chanters of the Patriarchate, they would say that the music dresses the words. Meaning, when we have a text, which is basically poetry, a hymn, right? It's basically poetry. And then you apply layers of music to the poetry. For what purpose? For the sound, or to accentuate the meaning of the text? When I say my soul cries out to the Lord, well, the way I dress that with music is going to be expressive of my soul being cried out, right? So, again, I'm not a specialist in the field, but what I can say, the accents in the musical text are meant to accent the meaning of the text. The metering and the melodic lines that are created, if it's more of a repetitive posture in the hymn, if it's more of a triumphant posture, then analogously text painting, as it's referred to, will occur, right? So I cry for my sins will go to a more minor, somber sound. I experience the power of the resurrection will go to something more triumphant and in the modes that are like diatonic or enharmonic, that give a little bit more oomph to the meaning. I think what the American or the English translations have to try to do in continuity with bringing from the old into the new would be definitely not to lose the priority of the word when painting with music. Because I've heard translations, George, and I'm sure you've used them. Yeah, sure, we fit it to the meter as it's supposed to be chanted in the original Greek, what we call the prosomia, these model hymns that have a certain, short musical pattern, right? But the meaning is so chopped up that it's like, the word goes to the next line because it has to fit the meter, but then you lost the meaning. So I think the greatest challenge in English Byzantine chant is preserving the primacy of the word and the meaning of the text. So you use the word dynamic, which I kind of like, because in biblical studies, they say something, I think it's biblical, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone listening. They have dynamic equivalent. So you have a text in the Bible, you're going to translate it. Some translators use what is so-called dynamic equivalent. You can't go word for word translation. You won't understand what the heck you're reading in English, because the Greek has another melody of poetry to it, even in the original text, right? So many translators use a dynamic equivalent. He has, in the Greek, you could say, death has been overthrown and life has been, established. The dynamic equivalent is death has been destroyed and life has conquered all. It's kind of meaning for meaning. That is going to be the great challenge, because and I know, and I'm sure even in the Arabic, you have hymns that are extremely dogmatic, theologically rich. Every sigma, every comma, every letter is like, whoa, 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 what did you just say? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one in essence, one in Trinity. Hold on. We got to make sure that we're getting theologically accurate, meaning accurate, and metered accurate, which is, if you look at some of the work that's being done, my hat tips to them, because they're doing a great job in the things that I've read. So I think that will be the challenge of the future, is creating English chant that preserves the accuracy of the original and paints with the music appropriately, that's understandable and singable and theologically accurate, would be my kind of download on the topic. That's going to be a challenge.
So in composing, it's important to, like you said, to text paint correctly, and that extends beyond just the actual sort of syllabic value of the word, but the meaning of the word. And the syllabic value is also very important too. We have to make sure that we're emphasizing the correct syllables in a word, emphasizing the correct words in a sentence, right?
Sure.
You were saying, for talking about resurrection, it's more diatonic and triumphant and beautiful. And then when talking about death and Hades, and it's more chromatic and low and all of these things. It's such a beauty of our music, and it's important that we don't just copy and paste, right?
Correct.
From any language, from Greek, from Arabic, from Romanian, from anything.
Right.
And I find it interesting. The people who understand this the best are not even native English speakers, because a lot of native English speakers, they hear Byzantine chant in other languages and they say, I want it to sound like how I like this hymn in this other language. But there's misaccentuations all over the place, and there's all sorts of fundamental problems with the music. But thank God, through the efforts of people like you mentioned, Gabriel Cremines, Samuel Heron, John Boyer, just to name a few,
John Boyer,
yeah, who have done such fantastic work in really prioritizing the language, and still allowing it to fit into the broader tradition of Byzantine chant, but also giving English its own sort of flavor. If you listen to Byzantine chant in any language, in Greek, in Arabic, Romanian, or whichever languages you have, they all have their own individual flavors, and it's important that in English we preserve that. And Some people say, "Oh, it still doesn't sound as good." Well, then to each their own.
That's right.
But at least the message is being
right.
displayed and is being spread beautifully. So to move on to the next thing, to talk a little bit more in detail about the choir and about the school. So, in your approach to teaching, or the teaching approach of the school, I'm sure it's changed over time as it's grown, and there's been different people in authority over there. But what is the ethos behind the teaching? What is the core? Not necessarily the ethos, right? Because when you're starting out, those things are,
you don't really do qualitative.
Right, exactly.
Of the music.
But what would you say is the best? How is the teaching of the school modeled?
Yeah. During my time, versus those who have assumed the school after I had left, I'm guessing or assuming it's more or less the same. During our time, we would try to start with a prayer, because these are hymns of the church. And then inevitably, I taught for a small period, I taught the youngest of the kids, what the text is saying. Christ came, died, resurrected. He's, the author of life, whatever the case may be. We weigh on him for mercy and grace. So I would try to, because I would teach in Greek to the kids, not speaking Greek, but I would teach them the texts of the original Greek to chant. But I wanted them to know what they're chanting, right? So that was one approach. Then we would do paralagie, which is the solfege, right? That was a primary thing until they got it perfectly, right? And then we would go to the melos, and that's when they would start to witness what we would call text painting, when they would begin to realize why it was important to talk about this hymn. At that point, George, we would progress at the pace of the student. It wasn't like year one, you're going to get through, modes 1 and 2. Year 2, 3 and 4. No. If a student was not studying and lacking, he didn't progress. And then that's what I was saying earlier, that at a certain point we had to let students go. Because it's very obvious which students make learning a priority and which don't. So for us, it was a little of a challenge to get people to be committed, to the degree that we wanted. And then part of the inspiration or attraction was that, if I get good enough, then I can join the choir. If I get good enough, then I can perform in a Carnegie Hall and stuff like that. And so that was one way that we kept the appetite of the chanters. These were all volunteers, by the way. I want to make that point as well. The teachers were paid for the hours of teaching. We had some elementary costs associated with the school because we didn't want to turn away anyone that potentially would want to learn but couldn't because of the finances, especially our younger kids. But all of the chanters in the choir side were volunteers, and they did this with a lot of love and selflessly. And so, we tried to be as embracing and loving to those chanters so that, we could keep them inspired to coming back. How can I say it? But so we would meet once a week for about an hour with our cohorts, our groups. Once a week, about an hour, is normally Saturdays, because practical reasons it was hard for our teachers and for our students to show up any other day of the week. And we kept attendance, all that good stuff, progress reports, try to see how to help the students the best we could. Every year we'd have an orientation, which comprised of a voice exam. Can you hold the pitch? If you can't hold the pitch, you can't chant, right? If you had vocal stability, being able to identify if a note was higher or lower, and stuff like that, which was done by our teachers. So the teachers would actually test their own students to see how they measure up. And then, the choir was another thing. So it was performance driven. So we have a concert at the Met. We're going to be meeting. These are the practice dates. These are the times, locations. This is the packet that we're doing. Take a look, start working, start making your notes. Here we go. It was really, really good memories, George. It was a lot of work. It was not easy because our choir director, he was constantly making corrections, reprints. iPads weren't too big back then. Now they've gotten more popular. We could have done it a lot easier with a stylus, marking my own PDF on my. Didn't work like that. We used to manually do everything. So it was a lot of fun, though. That I will say.
So in regard to the choir again, there are two concerts that I want you to discuss a little bit. You brought it up earlier, the concert in Constantinople. If you could talk about that one, and also if you could talk about your performance with the Saint Romanos the Melodist Choir of Beirut, under Father Romanos Jabran, who we actually just interviewed last week.
Oh, no way.
So I'm not sure when these will be releasing, but they'll be releasing probably in tandem with each other or one after the other. So if you could discuss both of those.
The trip to Constantinople was on the occasion of Pope, I want to say, was it Pope John Paul or Pope Francis visiting Constantinople? That was the thought process, was to bring a choir that was not necessarily indigenous to Greece, but like America having a Byzantine Greek choir. Like, how does that happen? With kids born in America, raised in America? That's crazy. It just showed the influence of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, musical at least, if not anything else, in the waters of the West here in America. It was phenomenal because we got donors to help us out. It was not an inexpensive trip. 48 people, and then there was other people who wanted to come as well. So we had a lot of lay people who came. That concert was organized for St. Irene's Church, Ieirini, the Peace of God, in Constantinople, which, without a single microphone, has the best acoustics of any church, they say, in all of Europe, without a microphone. Because the patriarch even noted how I hear them whispering, and we were up in the altar area. He says, "Where are the microphones?" And he said, "There are no microphones." So that concert, recorded live without microphones, please look it up on Facebook, and on YouTube, was incredible. Was just incredible. We could hear the papers ruffling in the back of the church, in the gynokoniti, in the loft that's for the women. Like, you could hear us rippling the pages of our performance. It was over 450 people in attendance. The choir did touring during the day. It was on the occasion of the Feast of St. Andrews, and it was during that trip in 13 that Nikolaos Steliaros, being an Archon Protopsaltis of the Church in America, was made an Archon of the Ecumenical Throne by the Patriarch. And he was given the title Archon Musikodidaskalos, teacher of the music, because of all the years he had taught for over 5 decades, without ever taking $1, George. He says, "My payment is for you to learn." That would be my payment. He's a very unique, dignified man. And they just don't make that. He would never talk at the chant stand. Just like one of those old timers that got it. So that trip was transformative for the choir members. We visited Hagia Sophia, the Monitis Choras, Karie Jami, which was made into a mosque, with the mosaics. We had our parties. We had we had Thanksgiving in Turkey. We ate turkey, as we were saying. And the bond of that group just was incredible. They bonded in a very unique way. We went to so many religious sites, old and new, and that was for them really special. Then, I guess from just the way word gets out, as we say, I was sent an email by Father Romanos, a very beautiful man. Really, I had such a great time with him. Phenomenal chanter, as I'm sure you will hear on his recordings. My goodness. I still remember he sang Same Newman at that concert in Plago First, and I was just like, God bless his soul. I mean, it was just a masterpiece, frankly. And that concert was so cool because, it literally was a hymn in Arabic, a hymn in Greek, and two powerhouse choirs, two wonderful conductors. It was just like a beautiful, humble performance. It had no self-projection in it. It was like really like, this is our music. Here you have it manifesting in two languages, And what would have been the cherry on top would have been a liturgy, a left and right choir, one singing in Arabic, one singing in Greek. And that would have been like the culmination. And it was also how the power of music can bring worlds together, because it was true. Like all of our Greek people, so to speak, showed up, in the church to hear their choir and to hear and then our brothers and sisters in the Arabic world, in the Arab Orthodox world, they got to hear something maybe that they haven't heard, in Greek. And so this kind of organized concerts really, I think, are special and really should be done more often, because I think the impact after that was like legitimate. Like we could do so much more to promote both traditions. And there were some other things that came up. We were invited to Poland to a musical festival, medieval chant, medieval music festival. Other things that came up, Father Romanos, I think, had extended invitations to go to Lebanon and things like this. But, again, it's finances. We had no budget line to help us from anywhere. It was individual donors who helped us, fundraising, things like that. So I look back, honestly, George, and say, I don't even know how we did all that, because we had no help, no financial help from anywhere, not even the Archdiocese, because there was just not a budget line for that. But by God's grace, we had great, great moments. Yeah.
So you talk about the cherry on top. You said it was the cherry on top if you would be able to do a liturgy together. And I couldn't agree more. Anytime our choir, the Sons of Antioch, gets together for a concert, we want to get there Thursday for rehearsals, and then Friday for a concert or rehearsals, Saturday concert, and then Sunday we always want to stay and do the liturgy together. Because it really is.
So here's the open invitation, George.
Yeah.
Come to Holy Resurrection anytime.
Wonderful,
and we will
wonderful.
make it happen.
Beautiful. Yeah, we would love to. Thank you for the invitation. And also, at first, that's just the most important thing to me. The concerts are amazing, but really, communing with one
I'm
another.
I'm going to cut you off, George. When we were in Ayes in St. Irene's, the indigenous Orthodox did not consider just a concert. Maybe that's taboo to say online. But there was clearly a sense of reverence. I believe they didn't clap until the end. They just heard the hymns and nobody clapped. Because they didn't consider it a performance. Rather, it was a prayer, So you raise a good point, that it is the worship. This is worship hymns. They're not performance hymns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more important than communing with one another, and there's nothing more important than the heavenly liturgy. So I just wanted to emphasize that point, because to me it's the most important thing. And the choir of St. Romanos did actually do the liturgy the next morning, and it was very beautiful, as I remember. But to have you guys there would have been extra beautiful.
Sure.
And also, our choir, we had a concert at the cathedral last December, a Christmas concert. Or actually, yes, at St. Nicholas. And actually, it wasn't a Christmas concert. We called it a divine presence because we were in the presence of St. Raphael, he established our church, the first church that he established in America.
Wow.
And it was his seat as well. And we were in St. Nicholas, and St. Nicholas Day was around that time, and Christmas was around that time. So it's like all of these things. So we just called it a divine presence, right? To be in the presence of St. Raphael in his cathedral of St. Nicholas around Christmas time, all of these things. So we chanted things from all of those feasts. And the whole time, at least in my head, because I was the only one who was present for that concert that you were speaking about, all I could think about was how this is the first time we've really done something like this since then, and it was in my head, like, I want to make an impact, or I want to impress upon people in the same way that concert impressed upon me. And I hope that we were able to do that for the people who were in attendance for our concert, because I remember I said the first thing I saw was in 2019. I was wrong. The first thing I saw was you guys at the cathedral that time, and that impressed so much upon me, and I thank you for that, even though you had no idea, but I thank you for that. So a couple things just to wrap up. As far as the future is concerned, the future of Byzantine chant, specifically in America, as we said, it's still in its infancy, and anything that you're beginning or that it's in its infancy is always going to grow exponentially as compared to something that's been around longer. The growth is much smaller. So as far as the future of Byzantine chant in America, the hope for a future of Byzantine chant in America, what are the next steps? What, given what you've seen, right? What do you think is the next step for Byzantine chant in America?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm compelled to say that perhaps, I don't want to go out into deep waters. If I wanted to be honest, I don't see in our young people a love for the liturgical life of the church. I don't see them drawn to worship. Frankly, I don't see young people being drawn to Byzantine music. And frankly, I don't see young adults being so drawn to joining a choir and singing with other older people. It's like, you ask a young adult today, even just what their name is in the setting of their peers, and they turn bright red, like they don't even want to answer. So in view of that, George, and I know I'm totally making this very all-encompassing comment, and it's probably not the case, but my gut is telling me that we're not going to have great numbers of young adults pouring into our Western choirs in the GOA or in our Byzantine schools. And that will inevitably lead to an atrophy within Western choirs, I would say, and Byzantine. So the few who God will inspire to continue are the ones who I think every parish or every region geographically should try to establish a school of Byzantine music. I'll let the cat out of the box. Is that the saying? When we had first established the school of Byzantine music, we had said it's going to be one branch of what we were calling then AIM, AIM, Archdiocesan Institute of Music, which would then have two components: Byzantine, choral, Western music, to try to activate and bring to life again young adults. It never materialized. We thought of introducing instruments, classical and Eastern, kind of music. It didn't really materialize. Probably because you need the right people in the right places, and I was not capable of kind of doing this kind of thing. It's above me. But I do think that the future has to have access to learning. And the future probably, I see, has less complicated music than the music that we may chant on a given Sunday, especially cherubic hymns and things like that. I think it'll be a natural simplification without losing the essence, and then building back up to more intense pieces. It's kind of how I feel. And these classes being accessible in English as just a demographic shift, you're going to have to analogously shift. You can't hold with no second thought. Byzantine chant is here, okay. English and Greek is also here. So that would be kind of my very carefully, hopefully stated response to your question. And I don't mean that unkindly to anyone, neither Western choirs or anyone. It's just how I see things.
So I think my own personal, just from my own experiences, my opinion would be a little bit different. Seeing the recent influx of converts from other faiths so I agree especially with the first part that you said about sort of the younger generations now being sort of disinterested in the liturgical life. I see that firsthand for sure. I work primarily as a youth coordinator, and so implementing the liturgical life and these things into their lives is difficult, because sometimes it feels like it's being flat out rejected, and it's really sad. However, I think that it shouldn't be understated that the people who are now entering the church, this massive influx of converts that's happening across the United States right now, it can't be understated how important it is, the type of convert that we're receiving, right? Because it's not people who, right? It's not like our people who grow up in the church, right, and they are accustomed to these things and then end up taking them for granted, but rather, they need to learn about the faith, right? So most of the people that come in, they come from other faith backgrounds, and then they read about church history and discover orthodoxy. So there's people who have been Orthodox for a year, 2 years, some catechumens who know way more about the faith, at least on a, not about the phronima or anything, but at least in principle, right? From an academic perspective, they know way more about the faith than I do. And it's with time, they'll develop the phronima and the mindset of, an Orthodox Christian, that only time can take. But I think in regard to chanting, those people are, like I said in the beginning when I was talking about the young adult choir that I just now started, there's such a zeal from them. There's such a zeal. And there's especially a zeal for the more traditional things that they felt that were lacking in their churches that they came from. Mm-hmm. And there are so many people, all the people who want to learn chant now are people who are coming into Orthodoxy. So I think that's very beautiful. And also, we have started, the Antiochian Archdiocese has started a ecclesiastical music school, and there is a Byzantine side and a Western side, and they keep having to make new classes because they can't accommodate all the students that want to learn Byzantine, primarily Byzantine chant. I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are, but at least I can speak for the Byzantine side and say they need to create all of these new classes and find teachers and things to do them, because there's such a zeal to learn this. So maybe I'm definitely coming at it from a different perspective. But
you raise very good, points. They had asked once a 20th century theologian in America, what do you have to say, Father, about the future of Orthodoxy and converts? You know what his answer was? Converts are the future of Orthodoxy in America. We don't have these huge influxes of migrants, immigrants anymore. So you raise a very good point. You raise a very good point, George. And I will modify my my thinking based on that. That, these so-called converts, they have other desires. They have the will and the desire to learn certain things, and among that could be very well Byzantine chant.
Mm-hmm. And to add one more thing to the point about sort of our own people being disinterested, or I don't want to say disinterested, but at least not interested in these things. Apathetic, right? Yeah. I see in the young children, K through, or even younger, through third, fourth, maybe fifth grade, it's there. That fire is there. I also work with a youth choir. And so we have kids from kindergarten to fifth grade, essentially. They love being in the church and learning about the music. And we just learn by rote, essentially, but we're learning the hymns of the liturgy right now. So they're going through Kyrie eleison, tes presvias, sosonimas, homonoyenis, all of these things, the Trisagion, and we'll eventually go till they learn a full liturgy, right? And they love it so much. And the parents tell me all the time,
It's crazy.
They're always chanting in the house, right? One of them told me that one of the kids who's not in the choir, his brother's in the choir, but she told me that her one son, who they attend church regularly, he'll be chanting. His favorite hymn to chant out in public is Eonia Imnimi. Said one day we're going to see some Greek people in public, and she's going to have a lot of explaining to do.
He's weeping for the world.
Right. For those who don't know, Eonia Imnimi is memory eternal. But I was saying that to say that the fire is there, at least at some point, and then it's lost. It's lost as a result, I would say, primarily of the society that we're in now. And I think that keeping the church the core of their lives will only further allow them to not be apathetic to these things, and to allow them into their hearts, and to keep them there, right? To keep them there, because then if that doesn't happen, then it's just the same story as Israel in the New Testament, right? Where, like, they rejected God, and then God gave it to the nations, and that's kind of what we're seeing right now. But we need to work so hard for not only for chanting, but for the whole life of the church, that we keep that flame lit. And I think music is such a beautiful way to do that. So to close on a light note, I wanted to just something. You're right. Something slightly humorous. If you could tell us your favorite or funniest story at the Analogion, something that always sticks with you. Funny story from a teacher, funny experience, or anything.
I have a couple.
Share as many as you want.
I'll share one just. Okay, so, Mr. Steliaros is very strict. I remember one day going to class with him, and when you do practicing at home and something you practice wrong, it just sticks in the ear. You can't unlearn it. So I had done the paralayi for a sequence. No, he'd say, stop. Do that again. I did it wrong again. He starts laughing. He goes, do you hear that you keep doing it wrong? I said, I don't know why. He goes, do it paralayi. I do it paralayi slowly, no problem. I go to do it melos, the words, wrong. He starts laughing. He closes the book. He goes, go home and learn it. He says, let me whistle it for you. He was one of the most incredible whistlers. So he starts whistling. And it sounds like a bird. It's like, my goodness, this man. So, obviously the next class. But I remember this sticks out, that the brain just could not unclick the mistake, audible mistake. I could hear him sing it right, but my brain was just, I had to unlearn. Next class, we did it no problem. It was not. the other thing we used to do in seminary, and this stays just on this podcast, is that when we would have chanters leading, we would have chant groups. So, this week, George, you're a chant group leader. So we had various upperclassmen who would lead the chant stand. And from time to time, if they saw a younger student who was more apt to be able to chant, they would allow him to assume the chair, as it was known, right? So here I go, and in my chant, there's a Pandeli, you're gonna lead tonight's Vespers. And the thing they would do when we would hit musical turbulence, because we were off pitch, they would start shaking the chant stand, the chair. So at one of these Vespers, I don't know, I was way off. I don't know what happened. If you go that first note wrong, you're dead. So so he starts shaking, and like 3 other chanters take the stand. They all start shaking the chant stand. So that was another flop and failure of mine. And then, inevitably as a deacon for so many years, you'll belt out something that's the wrong line. So it was during a hierarchical liturgy with Archbishop Demetrios, and for some reason, unbeknownst to me, instead of belting, saying the line that the deacon's supposed to say, which is, the reading is from the Holy Gospel, let us be attentive, glory to you. For some reason, I turn to the people and go, glory to you, O Lord, glory to you. And the chanter's looking at me, and there's a pause. And I'm like, what did I just do? I did something wrong. So, things like that. These are liturgical bloopers. You caught me a little off guard, George. But suffice it to say that we've had plenty of turbulence at the chant stand over the years. We've had many comical things that have happened with people, and myself included, saying the wrong things. And then, which I will not say on the air, we have translations. So I will leave my listeners with intrigue, and they will have to contact me on a personal level for me to disclose. But let's just say in my freshman year during Holy Week at the Great Canon of St. Andrew, one of my classmates checked out of the library a book written in Old English. And this was the book that we were going to use during the canon, with some interesting word selections. I'll leave it at that, George. And the turbulence that we went through that night has never been repeated in the chapel of Holy Cross.
Thank you. I'd say I'll probably tell the story a million times, but I remember one time during COVID, we were live streaming a Vesper service or a complines, maybe something during Lent, from our living room, which is what we would do at the time because the churches were closed. Right. So for the weekday services, we would go for Presanctified or for liturgy on Sunday, obviously, but for the weekday smaller services, we would do them from the house, live streaming from our living room, a little icon corner. And we have a dog. So the dog would create a turbulence, as you said, throughout the services, but I'll never forget one time where my father was setting up the iPad to do it, and we're live streaming to the St. Nicholas community, and my dad steps on the dog. And we're in the service, and then the dog cries out, and then my dad starts laughing, and then our whole family starts laughing, and the service just took a pause for a minute. But yeah, that's just a little something.
You've raised something like I'll go on the air and tell everyone that when I was a deacon, if the nervous laugh got me, it was lights out. I could not control. If the 5 times in my diaconal life where I got the giggles, I could not continue. I had to literally walk off the solea. So because it turns into, I can't control it. You start laughing, you can't stop laughing.
Right. Father, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, George.
This
Thank you. This was lovely.
And do you have any final words for the audience?
Just
or anything you're up to, or
just let's do our best to continue to learn this wonderful musical tradition of our church and try to deposit it into the generations that come after us, combining not only the musical beauty, but actually having the words of the hymns change our hearts. I think that's the in Greek zitoumeno. That's what our goal is, to change people's hearts, to love God more, to love worship more. And so my prayer goes out to everyone listening and all those who are chanters across America. Your role cannot be underestimated, and your impact onto the spiritual development and lives of your faithful cannot be minimized. God bless you, George, and your work, and the Sons of Antioch Media, and this beautiful podcast of Ethos and Yphos. So keep you strong, the Lord keep you strong, and the turbulence at a minimum.
Thank you so much, Father, and thank
I'll
you
be with
for your blessings especially.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Ethos and Yphos, a production of Sons of Antioch Media. You can find us on the Sons of Antioch YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Sons of Antioch on social media and visit sonsofantioch.us for more information. God bless.